thank you very much. My first time coming to Everything Open, and I thought I would do a talk on why most WordPress vulnerabilities are irrelevant. WordPress powers about almost half the internet now and has a bit of a reputation, particularly among those that don't use it, as being insecure. So I thought that might be a good way to introduce myself to the wider open source community here. So I'm Cameron Jones. I live about an hour and a half away down in Victor Harbor. I run a small web design business called Shorty Designs, and I also have a WordPress plugin marketplace called Mongoose Marketplace. WordPress is the most popular content management system on the market. And according to W3 Techs, has about 43% of all websites. Then that's the graph of distribution, and there's about a third use no or couldn't determine what CMS it was using, and then the next most popular one is Shopify, which is literally less than 5%. So the market share is ridiculously skewed towards WordPress. It's by far the most popular out there. But by being most popular, it makes itself a really obvious target for nefarious individuals who have less than nice intentions for your websites. And so because it is such a large target on its back, it has unfairly given WordPress a reputation for being insecure, and especially among those who don't use the software. WordPress core itself is quite secure, otherwise literally half the internet would be in grave danger right now. A number of really big companies and individuals use WordPress for their websites. Facebook uses it on some of their stuff, not the actual Facebook platform, but other parts of Facebook. News Corp uses it, news.com.au is a WordPress site. Taylor Swift uses WordPress, the White House uses WordPress. So if WordPress was as insecure as some people try to claim that it is, those rather big names would be in a lot of trouble. There are, occasionally you do find security issues with WordPress, but you find that with any software. On the other hand, the third-party packages that come with WordPress, in WordPress they're known as either themes or plugins, depending on what they do, are where most vulnerabilities tend to get found in the ecosystem. Because WordPress has a very low barrier of entry for developers, it can be really easy to put together something that's really useful and really functional, but can also be riddled with security flaws. And so in the early days, it was a little bit like the Wild West. I've been using WordPress for just over a decade now, and the ecosystem looks very different to how it did back then. WordPress has been around more than 20 years now, and you go back 10, 15, 20 years ago, and the standards certainly weren't there that are now. But the ecosystem has matured and corporatized a lot in that time. And plugins and themes that have been released through the official WordPress.org channel have both manual and automatic security checks that need to be passed to be released. So a lot of the stuff that you'll find out there, particularly the free ones, they've already gone through a number of security hoops to even be released. And WordPress is at the point now where a lot of businesses who have built their business around WordPress, developing these themes and plugins, they've built a sustainable business and have in-house security researchers as well. There are also businesses who have built their business around WordPress security itself. WordFence Security and PatchStack are some of the more well-known ones who specialize in doing WordPress security-related stuff such as reporting, auditing, and bounty programs. PatchStack literally will pay you a bounty if you find a bug with someone else's plugins. Now that probably sounds a little bit like a sales pitch for WordPress, and I'm sorry. But it's just that WordPress has a bit of a reputation for being insecure. The thesis for my talk is that, it's not, and that a lot of the vulnerabilities that are reported in WordPress are completely relevant. And like I can understand if people haven't looked at WordPress for 10 or more years, why they might think that. Or if you just take a glancing look at a vulnerability database, like PatchStack's vulnerability database has over 26,000 reported vulnerabilities, which is like in the whole ecosystem. So yeah, it's not a small number, but yeah, in my opinion, the vast majority of those are completely irrelevant. So yeah, this is the thesis for my talk. 99% or possibly even more are completely relevant, and by these vulnerabilities I mean the whole ecosystem, not just the WordPress core software. So just a bit of an overview of what I'm going to go through. What security measures WordPress has, the CVE program and the vulnerability scores, what the vulnerability reports look like, and then a better way to assess vulnerabilities and what WordPress's biggest security risks are and proactive prevention strategies for them. So WordPress has a number of built-in security measures that developers use to make sure that their stuff is secure. Validation, like data validation and prepared statements is a big one. That's not really so much part of WordPress core itself, but it comes with PHP. You do checks and for data types and typecasting. MySQL prepared statements. WordPress has wrappers for those, but yeah, not really so much WordPress itself, more the programming language. But then on top of that, WordPress has roles and capabilities, sanitization, escaping, and nonces for handling data. So out of the box, WordPress has about half a dozen different roles, and these have different levels of access to a site, and what you can and can't do depends on what role you have. An administrator can do just about everything, whereas if you are a subscriber, you can literally, there's nothing that you can do that you couldn't already do just by viewing the website publicly, other than edit your own profile. And so roles are really just a wrapper. There's not a hierarchical access system in WordPress. So what roles are made up of is different capabilities, and those capabilities then get assigned to the different roles. And so you can see there's a nice little graph here of what some of the default roles include. And so yeah, an administrator can do anything, literally, whereas like an editor can do anything related to content, but they can't change settings, and diminishing returns for other roles, and various plugins will add their own roles with their own special capabilities and that sort of thing. You can add custom ones to do other data management stuff for what people can and can't access. Sanitization, WordPress has a number of sanitization functions. So I don't even know how many there are. So that is, I'm sure you probably know what sanitization is, but there's a number of different functions to make sure that WordPress is filtering the data so that when someone submits something that there's not nasty stuff included in that data. And then escaping is the opposite of that, so that when data is pulled out of the database and then displayed on the front end, that it's also not including nasty stuff. And then lastly, we have nonces. So nonces are number used only once is what it stands for. Also, don't look that up in the Open Dictionary because it means something very different. So it's also not only used once. They have a duration of about 24 hours out of the box, I believe, before they expire. But they are just a token that is generated when you open something like a settings page to make sure that the settings page was actually opened so that it can be submitted. Otherwise, someone could just send a GET request or POST request to a URL and potentially change data that they should not have had access to. And so WordPress vulnerabilities are reported through the CVE program, just like any other software vulnerability. So CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. And yeah, it's for recording vulnerabilities with software packages, and they use the CVSS, or Common Vulnerability Scoring System, to rate the severity of vulnerabilities. And so this one that I've pulled out of somewhere is given a score of 7.2 out of 10, and that is classed as a high severity. And that number comes from a number of different factors, which you can see the vector string there, and that's different ways that the vulnerability may or may not be exploited, or gets put into a formula, and that comes up with a number. The problem with CVSS scores, in my opinion, is that they don't really accurately reflect the severity of the vulnerability, and often over-exaggerate it. So part of the problem is the first word of that acronym is common, and it's appealing to all software packages and doesn't really have the nuance that individual platforms and packages have, and can overlook specifics of things. And I'll go into a few examples of how something that might look super dangerous is really not. And part of how it can over-exaggerate it is the vector part of the attack vector metric part of it, because WordPress is for websites. It's always on the internet, so it's always rated as network, which has the highest weighting of the attack vector metric. So just automatically it's already off to a bad start. So I'm just going to show you a quick example of one vulnerability that affected some of the sites that I manage. So this was, it's for a plugin called Uber Menu. When you have those websites with mega menus, that's what that's for. I probably had half a dozen sites that have this plugin on it. As we can see, the CVSS is a 7.2, which is rated as high. But when we look at what the actual details of it, and if you see cross-site request forgery, that sets off a few red flags. But when you look into the details of it, it kind of looks slightly less dangerous. And so you can see that all that this vulnerability is that they can reset a settings page. And not only that, they need to socially engineer the attack through phishing. So the chances of this happening is pretty low, because the returns for being able to do this is no, there's nothing there. You can't put your Viagra spam links on your on the website. You can't redirect it to a not safe for work site like a lot of the attacks tend to be. So yeah, it's not, you see it's a high severity vulnerability, but the amount of work required to go into this exploit, and the very limited returns that someone would get from doing it, means that it's not actually a very high severity vulnerability in the end. And so this is another security report of it. And so, this is PatchStack, and they have put it down as a low priority. And part of PatchStack's services, they offer a WordPress plugin that adds security to your website, and they will add their own patches to vulnerable packages before the actual patches are released, or before they've been updated on the site. And as we can see, they've rated it as a low priority with no patch even necessary. So yeah, it really highlights just how exaggerated those CVSS scores are. So yeah, when one of the leading WordPress security businesses says you don't even need a patch for this vulnerability, it's safe to say that it's been over-exaggerated by the CVSS. It's not to say that vulnerabilities shouldn't be patched as soon as practical, because they should, regardless of how severe they are, but just not as dangerous as it might have been made out to be. So I have my own little rudimentary way of scoring WordPress vulnerabilities. It's just a simple 3x3 matrix on comparing both the likelihood and the risk. So likelihood, like 1, probably will never happen. 2, yeah, it might happen depending on maybe certain scenarios, and 3 is, fix this yesterday. And the risk it poses to the site, same sort of thing. Like, yeah, a 1, there's nothing they can really do to it. 2, yeah, maybe, potentially. And 3 is, again, fix this yesterday. And so that's what, yeah, my rudimentary system looks like. And this is what I would rate that last vulnerability that we looked at on that, because, yeah, the amount of work required to exploit that is quite high. You need to socially engineer through a phishing attack, and also, the amount of damage that they can do is very minimal. And plus, with the sites that I manage, I've got daily backups for that. You shouldn't always, backups aren't the be-all and end-all to, mitigate against vulnerabilities. But, if by some miracle this was exploited, it would be very easy to revert it. And, it's not the type of vulnerability where they can add a backdoor into the site. So we're going to look at just a couple more examples of varying severity. So yeah, this is a SMTP plugin, authenticated SQL injection is what it is. And so this is the WordFence report, and you can see it has a 7.2 on the CVSS. So which one was this? So yeah, so what this was someone can, in the admin, do a SQL injection attack. But one of the key things is that it requires administrative privileges to do so. So yeah, again, you look at a 7.2 CVSS, looks really scary, but all it's effectively saying is that an administrator can hack their own site. If you're an admin, you can do whatever you want on the site anyway. So yeah, we'll also look at what patch stacks say, and again, they've said low priority, vpatch unnecessary, because yeah, the chances of this being exploited is practically nothing, because yeah, an administrator can hack their own site, probably not going to happen. If they wanted to do damage to their site, they would have already done it. And so this is what I would have rated it. Likelihood, not likely at all. It is an SQL injection attack, and like maybe on some installs there might be a bit of a risk, but as to what they can do, because it's an SQL injection attack, they might have other tables in the database or something that they might not be supposed to have access to. But yeah, that sort of vulnerability is something that, yeah, especially on the sites I manage, is just completely trivial. So here's another one, which is actually one of my plugins, because I am not safe from blame for writing insecure code. So this is the WordFence report, and this one's given a 6.4, so not quite as bad. So how this one worked was, WordPress has these little snippets called shortcodes, and it's a way of coding without coding. So you add some, it's for people who don't write code. So you add, a shortcode with these attributes, you tell it what to do, and then it will, behind the scenes will generate the code. So this one, I just forgot to escape one of the attributes on the front end. So if you added one specific attribute, you could put some JavaScript in there, and it would execute if you loaded the page on the front end. Again, it's not the most severe thing. This is slightly more dangerous because, yeah, it's arbitrary JavaScript being loaded. But what it does need is someone with permissions to actually add content, which, unless you have very specific configurations, like having your website set up to allow users to arbitrarily register and generate content, you're probably not going to run into this. Some bigger organizations, like News Corp, would certainly have this sort of thing where you have different levels of content editors. But for the most part, you generally, like most websites, have only got administrator accounts, so it's probably not super dangerous. Yeah, and this is what patch text says. They say it's a medium priority, so yeah, it's a little bit more dangerous than the last one because it's, it's not administrator, it was contributor level, which is far lower down the list. You can add your own content, but you can't publish anything if you're a contributor. And they do have a vpatch for this one, even though this was like years ago, so if you haven't updated it, you should have already. So yeah, and this is what I would have scored it, like right in the middle. Again, like most websites, they've only got administrators, probably not a problem, but on the few websites that they do, it could be. So yeah, I've given this a 2 in both because it's unlikely for the most part, and it's not the most dangerous thing that has vulnerability that there ever is, but it's certainly more than the last one. So this one here, WordFence compromise of 2-factor secrets. So this one made the rounds, I don't know, a year or so ago. Now, this was a very interesting vulnerability because it was not even given a CVSS score. The reporter submitted it and it was told that it was not a vulnerability. That's how minor this one is. So what this was that WordFence is, it's a security plugin and you can set up 2-factor authentication through the security plugin, but they were storing the secret keys in the database, and so the security researcher who reported this was like, if there is a SQL injection on the site, then someone can steal the secret keys for the 2-factor authentication. The bigger problem is that you have an SQL injection on your site. So yeah, when they submitted this as a vulnerability, both to WordFence and to the CVE program, they were told this is not a vulnerability. They did end up changing it because, again, it's not something that you want, it's not ideal, but yeah, it's, your bigger problem is the fact that you have an SQL injection vulnerability on your website. So yeah, I rated this one as just, I would probably rate this less than 1 if I could, because the likelihood of it being exploited is so low, and the fact that it required a much more severe vulnerability to already be there means that it's there's no point because there's so much more damage you can do. Last example I'm going to look at is one that all those ones that I've shown so far are ones that are on sites that I manage. This one's not, and you'll probably see why. So this one was rated a 9.8, and yeah, it's a bit of a doozy. So it was, unauthenticated SQL injection. So yeah, if an unauthenticated is a big one, there's some of the ones I've shown already, have some sort of authentication. You need certain amounts of permissions to be able to even exploit something. This one, anyone can exploit. So yeah, this one's a bit dangerous. Yeah, this was a high priority, patch immediately. If you haven't updated this, you are in trouble, sort of thing. And yeah, from the very short time I took looking into that, I'm just like, oh boy, that is bad. That's pretty much the worst you can get. So that's, yeah, one of the few times where the CVSS kind of accurately reflects how dangerous the vulnerability was. So yeah, that's just a few examples of how I like to break down WordPress vulnerabilities. And if you think I'm talking out my ass, then you can refer to PatchStack, who have their priority scores. So yeah, if you think I don't know what I'm talking about, I don't pretend to be a security expert, I just know WordPress. But yeah, I found that when I'm assessing vulnerabilities, they tend to align pretty well with how PatchStack rates them in terms of priority as well. So as you can see, while there are some vulnerabilities in the ecosystem and some very serious ones, most of them are extremely difficult to exploit or have little scope to do damage and can only be exploited by users with administrative permissions. Like, I see this a lot. And yeah, some of these vulnerability reports honestly can border on frivolous at times. So if a vulnerability has been released in the last 25 minutes that I've been talking, and the chances are that there has been, because there's tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of third-party packages for WordPress, This is sort of the chances of that vulnerability affecting your WordPress website. For a start, you would have to actually be running that package and a vulnerable version. And yeah, there's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of packages. The chances of that already are fairly small. And so, again, the packages that you're running are going to tend to be some of the more popular ones. And these are the ones that have been around for years, maybe decades. The ones that have had so many eyes on them, they might have internal security teams, that sort of thing. And then, if by some chance, your website has this vulnerability, then this vulnerability still has to be exploited at permissions levels that are dangerous, and then has to have the scope to even cause damage. And so this is how I come to my thesis of 99% of vulnerabilities in WordPress are irrelevant. So now I'm going to come to what the actual biggest security risk to your website is, and that's you. So your website's administrators are your website's biggest risk. As mentioned, I run a web design business called Shorty Designs. I manage about 50 websites for different clients, across a range of industries all across the country. And so because I'm actively maintaining these websites, it's extremely rare that something gets hacked. But it does happen, and pretty much every single time it's happened, it's been because of the client or someone that the client has added to the website as an administrator. And so in the vast majority of cases, we see the exact same thing. A hacker has gained access via an insecure or reused password. Almost every time without fail. I've been in WordPress for over a decade now, and almost every single time without fail, this is how hackers get in. And so what they tend to do is they will install a plugin as the first thing they do. Sometimes it's a file manager plugin so that they can make edits to files directly on the server. Sometimes it's a backdoor plugin that they disguise as a more popular one, because WordPress plugins, you just add some headers to your doc, your doc block on the PHP file, and then that's what it shows up as. So copy and paste that from a popular plugin, add your backdoor script, and it looks like you're running your SEO and you're actually not. And then they'll either install that backdoor directly, or then they'll use that file manager plugin to make edits to files on the server or upload new files and add backdoors that way. And from there, once they've got that backdoor, then they're defacing the site with spam content, adding redirects, or using it as part of a botnet. What do we do to try and mitigate that? What a lot of security people will try and tell you is automatic updates. I'm here to tell you that I don't like automatic updates. As great as they sound in principle, and certainly from a purely security perspective, absolutely. You get the security patches as soon as they're released. It's all automated. You don't have to do anything, and you're golden. But it's true from a purely security perspective, but not so much from a website operations perspective. So I've seen a lot of plugin updates do things like breaking changes and removing functionality. Like, had a e-commerce plugin I ran into many years ago that decided to just wipe all their reports in an update. They just no longer tracked any customer data, so that was brilliant. Updates include fatal errors. We've seen plugins that get acquired by spammers and then they add backdoors. These used to be perfectly legitimate plugins. Someone's gone, I don't want to maintain this anymore. Someone said, here's some money, and they've added backdoors to it and other malicious stuff to it. We've also seen supply chain attacks where, a author's account gets hacked, and then, you know, again, a perfectly legitimate plugin gets things added to it that shouldn't be. And so, you know, for us, what we've seen is that this happens a lot more than vulnerabilities getting exploited. And so for us, the risk of a bad update is far more likely than the risk of a security vulnerability. So if we don't recommend automatic updates, what do we do instead? So first of all, we have everything through a continuous integration pipeline. And I know to some of you that sounds obvious, but in the WordPress space, it really isn't a thing outside of enterprise. But yeah, having a repository, automatically deploying from that repository to the server, you know, running updates locally, testing things locally, that sort of thing. You know, it sounds basic because it is, but in the WordPress world, that is not super common at all. And that's something that we're really strict on. You know, updates to the code base are only made through the repo. Like if the client wants access to the repo, we can give it to them. But that's the only way that files are getting changed is through the repo. And to help enforce this, because as I mentioned before, one of the things that hackers do when they get in is they like to install plugins. So I prevent that from happening. And because everything needs to be done through the repo, and to stop people from, you know, just arbitrarily installing new plugins on production, whether they be a hacker or not, I have this included as a must-use plugin. Have more stuff, obviously, for internal systems stuff, but this is the main thing that prevents them from being able to install plugins, update plugins. There's, you know, ways to edit files, you know, plugin and theme files directly from the admin that this disables as well. And so you can see it doesn't run if it's on a local environment, so I can still do all that locally where I'm supposed to. But this prevents that from happening on production where I don't want the clients to do that. So that enforces not just the fact that the code changes to the code base are being made through the repo, but also if by some chance someone gets in, they're extremely limited in what they can do. They can't install the plugins they want to. You know, they can depending on, you know, the levels of permissions they've gotten into, they might be able to change some content. But in that case, we take daily backups, and we also have security logging to, you know, monitor what has been changed and when and where and that sort of thing. So yeah, those two things are, you know, the main things that we put in place to, yeah, deter and prevent damage from hackers. So yeah, that brings me pretty much to the end of my talk. So yeah, my thesis was that 99% of WordPress vulnerabilities are utterly irrelevant, and I'm curious to know if you agree. Yeah, I'm Cameron. I run a web design business called Shorty Designs and a WordPress plugin store called Mongoose Marketplace. Thank you.
All right, so we do have time for questions. Do we have any? Oh, yep.
That was an awesome talk. Thank you.
Cheers.
So there's a new kind of model for, I guess, the likelihood of vulnerabilities being exploited called EPSS, or the Exploit Predictability Probability Scoring System. It's kind of a model. CVSS looks at severity, EPSS probability. I'm just wondering, in the WordPress community, have you seen much adoption of EPSS and kind of scoring the likelihood of vulnerabilities being exploited?
No, not really.
Okay.
That's the first I'm hearing of it. Like, obviously, that's a very important part of it is, yeah, the likelihood of something being exploited, not just, yeah, how severe it is. So yeah, like, that's something that I use in my own assessment of vulnerabilities. So thank you for informing me of that. I'm glad I'm learning something in my own talk. So yeah, I'm hopeful then that, you know, we're going to adopt more of this sort of stuff. So yeah, because CVSS really doesn't quite cover it. You know, like, I only really do WordPress. I'm sure that other, you know, systems and like CMSs and that sort of thing, it's also got limitations in as well. So, you know, having those sort of systems would be really great, not just for me, but for everyone in open source.
So your thesis, do you think you could probably, I think you could probably be correct if you removed WordPress from it. So I'm curious, do you think like this is particularly a WordPress problem, or you think that this is like the CVSS like vulnerability sort of, you know, the way we handle it, both from like an organizational sort of level and a technical level, is kind of broken?
Potentially, yeah. It's a common vulnerability scoring system, so it has to appeal to all software really. So it's limited in its own scope of what it can assess. There's vulnerabilities being reported in software all the time, and vulnerability that's getting reported in the Joomla ecosystem has absolutely no relevance to me right now because I don't use it at all. And even ones for things that, you do use, you know, the vulnerabilities aren't necessarily something that's a danger to your system. So, I mean, I do WordPress. It's pretty much the only thing, like, work-wise I use. But yeah, I can certainly imagine that this would be reflective of a lot of other ecosystems as well, yeah. But don't quote me on that because, yeah, I'm a WordPress guy, I'm not an everything else guy.
Similarly, as someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with WordPress community, you pointed out that a few of those vulnerabilities only really make sense if you're sort of compiling one on top of another. Feels like the average WordPress admin who's installing ancient-ass copies of unreliable plugins probably also isn't doing a good job of their other plugins. Doesn't that make that sort of stacking scenario more likely than less likely?
Only really if you're not maintaining your site, possibly. But again, the probability of having both, like, lining up, it's rare enough that, you know, there's one that affects your site. The probability of, you know, both of them being on your site is additionally rarer.
The very terrible admin who's got the first one is likely to be an equally terrible admin who's probably got the second one as well? Or is that not something that's... I don't know how WordPress plugin updates work, but if they're not updating one of them, aren't they probably not updating the other one as well?
Well, in that case, yes. If they're not updating one, they're probably not updating both. It's more the probability of both vulnerabilities being there. And yeah, we see that quite a lot is, you know, there'll be a vulnerability, you know, only executable if there's a pop chain present and there is none in the plugin, but if another vulnerable plugin is like, and if you already had a more vulnerable plugin on there, then you probably would have noticed by now, like the two-factor code one. Like if you've got an SQL injection problem on your site, you're probably already in trouble with it before you even get to the point of there being a vulnerability with some other parts. So, there are plenty of irresponsible website owners for sure. But yeah, and yeah, there are websites that have been abandoned, they get hacked, you know, like it does happen. But still the number of, the chance of a vulnerability affecting the site is still, in my opinion, fairly low.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
How do you balance communicating this to clients with like a sort of not as much technical knowledge without making them think that we don't need to care about security versus that, you know, everything is terrible? Like I've had clients who have been approached by other businesses trying to sell services, but being like, oh, it looks like you have an outdated version of this, and like that obviously scares them. So you know, communicating to that the risk is low, and yes, I'm aware of X, Y, and Z. It's not, you know, you don't have this problem because I haven't been doing my job, sort of thing. So there's that sort of element with clients, but then also the element of where people want to be, like, so for most of my clients, I'm the only admin on the site. Clients can't install their own themes and plugins and so on. And if I do give them that, it comes with a whole disclaimer. But then there's sort of a school of thought in parts of the WordPress community or the sort of small-scale website community in general, where like that we shouldn't be doing that. That we're, you know, holding the website hostage, or you know, it's your site, you should have full access, you should be able to install stuff. And yeah, so how do you sort of communicate then to clients that whether or not you give them that access? as to the risks and how to manage it or how you're managing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't let them install stuff on production, but what I do say to them is, if you want access to the code base, I will give you access to the repo. Like, if you want to make wholesale changes and break stuff, go for it. I'm not responsible for that. But yeah, like it's definitely a risk. Like, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, might be a bit hard to do some things for them. And yeah, there are definitely developers out there who hold websites hostage, which is not great. And yeah, there is a bit of a fine line to balance there as to, are you holding it hostage or are you protecting them? And yeah, like I communicate, like, yeah, I only do this for security purposes. This is to keep your site safe. If you want access to the code base through the repo, I will give that to you so that you have access to that. So yeah, like I don't, I don't hold the code base to ransom, like, from them. Just because they can't install stuff on production doesn't mean they can't install it, because yeah, if they were to spin up a local site, commit a new plugin and push it up, then that will deploy, and it's just a longer process of the same thing. So yeah, obviously, yeah, communication's key. I try and keep it to, I do this for security purposes to keep your website safe, and if you want access to the thing, like, and it's in my contracts, like, can't make changes to the code base on production, has to be through the repo. You will get access to the repo if you ask for it. So.
If clients say code about some vulnerability, something, and they're freaking out, how do you but you've assessed it as low risk compared to, like, say, someone else has told them about the CVSS score. How do you then communicate that, or like, as to why haven't you fixed it?
Yeah. So yeah, it does happen a lot. I get forwarded vulnerabilities from clients. I'm like, yeah, I already know. Depending on it, it's like, yeah, I'm looking into it. I've got, we're rolling out updates for it. We've already updated it. Yeah, sometimes it's not relevant, and I go back to the client and say, I've assessed this, and this does not pose an active risk to your site, and they're pretty happy with that. So yeah. And that's part of what's inspired this talk, is the fact that, yeah, every single little vulnerability, their website hosts will send them an automated thing saying, you've got a vulnerability on your website, you need to update now. And they go, can web developer please, we have a vulnerability on our website. And it's like, this is irrelevant. Like, this is not even a real threat. So yeah, they're normally pretty happy with that.
All right, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you, Cameron. I've got a small token appreciation from the conference organisers here. Can we thank him one more time?